Thank you for joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We are coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are also on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email him directly with the contact information seen on the last slide. Great, just a little bit about us. We are a Washington, D.C. based firm and provide services for federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing and also post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us there. These are a few upcoming events that you can find more information here, also on our website. And we now offer advertising, so you can contact me if you would like more information. And our webinar today is sponsored by AccuTrack. Here's a short message from them.
AccuTrack Consulting and Accounting Services is an 8A WOSB CPA firm committed to supporting entities to sustain growth in government contracting. Our outstanding DCAA accounting solutions reduce audit risk, improve cash flows, and give you peace of mind. Contact us today to learn how we can enhance your DCAA accounting efforts.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Timothy Fern is our speaker today, and he's going to be covering winning SBA AA Sole Source Awards. And Tim, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mallory. I certainly appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. As Mallory said, my name is Tim Fern, and I'm a partner in the Federal Government Contracting Group at the law firm of Cohen, Seglius, Pallas, Greenhall, and Furman in Philadelphia. So I'm joining you live today from Philadelphia. I'm excited to be here with you and excited to be a part of the Jennifer Schaus and Associates Federal Government Contracting webinar series. This afternoon, we're going to talk about strategies for winning small or sole source awards in the Small Business Administration's 8A Business Development Program. Next slide, please. And we can go ahead and jump to the next one, Mallory. So the United States government has long supported small business concerns by implementing policies to ensure that a fair proportion of the government's contracts and subcontracts for both goods and services are placed with small business contractors. The current goal of the federal government is for 23% of its prime contracting dollars to be spent with small business enterprises. This is relevant to today's webinar because the current goal with regard to small disadvantaged businesses is 5%. Next slide, please. So I used to teach at the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center in school, and in my portfolio was FAR Part 6 competition. And I used to tell the students who would come to the school, generally it was attorneys throughout the federal government, that if something in the federal government didn't make sense, that you can usually tie it back to FAR Part 6 and the different competition requirements that the government has. And the government has these requirements. They grew out of really the late 70s, early 80s, when you start seeing in 1984 the Competition and Contracting Act passed and some of the other reforms that were passed to eliminate procurement fraud, to have a fair and transparent system, to help develop innovation and so forth. So when you start talking about small business set-asides, it's important to keep in mind that this is a special category that's exempt really from the competition rules that are contained in FAR Part 6. And what FAR Part 6 tells us is that the government should have full and open competition to the maximum extent practicable. And there are some limitations on that, or some exceptions to that. And when we start talking about small business set-asides and small business contracting, this 23% number is an exception. And these contracts are set aside. Not everybody's eligible to compete. We've limited the pool of competition to small businesses, but it's important to note that generally when we get within a small business set-asides, we have full and open competition within our eligible categories. So there are two different kinds of set-asides in the Small Business Administration's 8A program. The first are competitive set-aside contracts, and then the second, and this is the key, are sole source set-asides. And this is the big advantage really to the 8A program. So I think most folks have heard of the Rule of 2. In a webinar that we just did previously, we talked about the rule of 2 years in business. This is not the rule of 2 years in business. This is a rule of 2. And the rule of 2 is a requirement that's included in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR, that aims to assist small businesses in their attempt to win federal contracts. The rule of two says that if there are two qualified and competitive small businesses expected to submit an offer between the micro purchase threshold and the simplified acquisition threshold, the contracting opportunity is automatically set aside for small businesses. Now, the micro purchase threshold, most folks knew it at $2,500. It was then at $3,000. In the last NDAA, it's now up to $10,000. The FAR hasn't quite caught up with that. So you'll see a lot of folks define it as the micro purchase threshold, which is going to be $10,000. And the simplified acquisition threshold has undergone similar changes. It's been raised from $150,000 to $250,000. So the bottom line is if there are two qualified and competitive small businesses who the government expects to receive offers between the micro purchase threshold and the simplified acquisition threshold, it is automatically set aside for small businesses. Any contract above the simplified acquisition threshold must also be set aside for small businesses if certain requirements are met. The first requirement is that two qualified small businesses must make an offer of products, and the second requirement is that fair market prices will be used and that the business is able to satisfy and provide the best performance with regard to cost and schedule. So everything between the micro purchase threshold and the simplified acquisition threshold is automatically set aside. Anything over the simplified acquisition threshold can be set aside if certain requirements are met. Once it's set aside, it's full and open competition within the particular set aside category. And in this case, we're talking about the 8A Business Development Program. Those are our competitive set aside contracts. Now, sole source set aside contracts are very, very different. And what this says is that the government can award contracts outside of the normal competitive bidding process. This usually happens only when a single business can fulfill the government's requirements, but it's important to note, and this is why we're talking about it, that the SBA has the authority to award sole source contracts under the 8A Business Development Program. So everything's typically set aside. If we only are going to have one contractor who's able to do the business, they can sole source it, or the SBA can set it aside as part of that business development program, the 8A Business Development Program. Next slide, please. So simply put, this is the key advantage of the 8A program when compared to all the other socioeconomic programs like the Hub Zone, Women-Owned Small Business, is the fact that the government can award the sole source contracts. Agencies can award an 8A sole source contract below certain competitive thresholds, which are different than the micro purchase threshold and the simplified acquisition threshold, and they don't have to comply with the Rule of Two. What this does is it allows for faster procurement times in most cases and decreased administrative costs for both the government and for the companies who are competing. Next slide. All right, the government can award a sole source 8A contract if the contracting officer determines that the qualified small business is responsible, and that means that they're able to compete and perform the requirements. The resulting contract can be awarded at a fair market price, and the government estimate doesn't exceed the following, and this is key. $7 million for manufacturing requirements, $4 million for all other requirements, and again, there are special rules for our Alaska Native corporations, our tribally owned firms, and our Native Hawaiian organizations, and those are going to be beyond the scope of what we're going to be able to cover here in 20 minutes. So again, the contracting officer can award a sole source 8A contract if we meet all those different requirements. Responsible, fair market price, and it has to be below the threshold of $7 million and $4 million unless you're an ANC, tribally owned firm, or NHO. Next slide, please. So let's talk briefly about the 8A program qualifications. To be eligible for the Small Business Administration's 8A Business Development Program, a business must be considered small as defined by the applicable NAICS code. The small business concern must be unconditionally owned and unconditionally controlled by one or more of the following: socially disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged individuals who are of good character and are citizens of and residing in the United States, who demonstrate potential for success and it's important that the business concerned must not have already participated in the 8A program. So you're going to learn businesses are eligible once they're in the program to stay in the program for 9 years. If a company has graduated, they're not eligible to get back into the program. The other thing to note here is the small business has to be unconditionally owned and unconditionally controlled, and those are terms of art, by socially disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged individuals. So you have to be both socially disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged. So let's go to the next slide and take a look at how the SBA defines socially disadvantaged. So there's a rebuttable presumption that members of certain groups are considered socially disadvantaged. Those groups are identified in the SBA's regulations and include African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Pacific Americans, and subcontinent Asian Americans. If an individual is not a member of one of the groups listed in the SBA regulations, that individual may still be able to establish that they are socially disadvantaged if they can provide certain evidence of individual social disadvantage. Evidence of individual social disadvantage includes one objective distinguishing feature, such as race, ethnic origin, gender, or physical handicap, personal experiences of substantial and chronic social disadvantage, and then a negative impact on entry into advancement in the business world because of the disadvantage. In other words, an individual needs to prove that a distinguishing feature has had a negative impact through actual personal experiences. And in the last webinar that I hosted, I provided the example of one of our clients who was a female dredger in a male-dominated dredging industry. So her distinguishing feature was her gender. She actually experienced substantial and chronic social disadvantage because of her gender, and her gender negatively impacted her ability to enter into the business world of dredging because it's a male-dominated industry. And she was able to demonstrate that she was a socially disadvantaged individual for purposes of the SBA 8A program. So in addition to being socially disadvantaged, next slide please, an individual must also be economically disadvantaged. And how does the SBA define economically disadvantaged? Economically disadvantaged individuals are those individuals whose ability to compete in the free enterprise system has been impaired due to diminished capital and credit opportunities as compared to others in the same or similar line of business who are not socially disadvantaged. So we're comparing our socially disadvantaged individuals to peers or like peers to determine whether or not they have the same ability to compete for credit and capital opportunities. In order to demonstrate economic disadvantage, an individual's net worth, their personal income, and fair market value of his or her assets cannot exceed certain maximum dollar thresholds. In other words, if an individual exceeds any one of these three thresholds, the SBA will find that he or she has access to credit and capital, and they're not considered economically disadvantaged. Now, when we look at these numbers, it's important to note that there are two threshold numbers for each category. One that the individual must be below in order to obtain their 8A status, and one that the individual must always be below in order to maintain their 8A status. So the first number you see is to obtain, and the second number that you're going to see is the one that you need to be below to maintain. In other words, it's possible to lose your 8A eligibility if the qualifying individual's net worth, personal income, or fair market value of assets exceeds the second threshold. So let's take a quick look at those thresholds. To be eligible for the 8A program, an individual's net worth cannot exceed $250,000. And in order to maintain eligibility, an individual's net worth cannot exceed $750,000. In calculating an individual's net worth, the SBA does not include the individual's interest in the 8A concern, and this is always a question that clients have. I have a lot of it invested in my business. So the SBA will not consider the individual's interest in the business. They're not going to consider the individual's equity in the primary or personal residence. And in most cases, they're not going to consider IRAs or similar retirement account funds. To be eligible for the 8A program, an individual's personal income, which is determined by your adjusted gross income on your taxes. So an individual's personal income averaged over the previous 3 years cannot exceed $250,000 to be eligible for the 8A program. In order to maintain eligibility, an individual's personal income cannot exceed $350,000. So it's important, again, folks in business have good years and bad years. So the SBA has said, hey, look, you guys can go ahead and we can average these out over 3 years. And as long as our personal income averaged over 3 years is below $250,000, an individual is eligible to qualify for the 8A program. To be eligible for the 8A program, the fair market value of all assets, excluding IRA or other similar retirement account funds, must be below $4 million. And in order to maintain eligibility, the fair market value of all assets, excluding IRA or other similar retirement account funds, must be below $6 million. So those are our thresholds for economically disadvantaged. Next slide, please. So in order to be considered an eligible 8A entity, the business concerned must obtain its certification from the SBA. This can be done by submitting an application via the link there at certified.sba.gov. It's important to note that a business must be registered in the system for award management before it will be able to use the SBA certification website. Once the application is submitted and the supporting documents are provided, the SBA will review the application and notify the entity once it's been approved or disapproved. And as I noted earlier, an SBA certification lasts for a maximum of 9 years. Next slide. Once admitted to the SBA 8A program, participants must annually submit information to their servicing SBA district office to support continued 8A program participation. At a minimum, annual review submissions are going to include certification that the eligibility requirements are still met, and this really relates to the thresholds that we talked about earlier. Certification that there are no changed circumstances that could adversely impact eligibility, such as suspensions, debarments, arrests, convictions. They're going to require personal financial information for each disadvantaged owner. They're going to require a record of all payments, compensation, and distributions made to each owner, officer, or director. And if payments are made to all three, they'll be requiring records of all those payments to each one of those individuals. They're going to require a listing of any fees paid to agents or representatives for assistance in obtaining a federal contract. And again, there is a contingency against, or a prohibition against contingency fees, and the SBA is very concerned about procurement fraud and folks doing things that they shouldn't do with regards to this program. Next slide, please. So what folks really want to do is understand the paths to this sole source 8A award. It's not enough to be in the company or in the program. The key is you want to be, if you're in the socioeconomic, any of the socioeconomic programs, you want to be able to compete for that 23% of contracts that are set aside. And again, those are competitive requirements. But remember that one distinct advantage of the 8A program is the sole source award. And winning a sole source 8A award requires a lot of time and effort on the part of the business concerned. And so there are really three paths that a company can take to win a sole source 8A contract. The business concern can market itself to the agency, and this is the most common path, and we're going to discuss it in detail on the next two slides. The second path is an SBA requirements search letter. And this can occur where either one, your company learns about a requirement that it believes it is qualified for, and then asks the SBA to send the agency a requirement search letter requesting that the agency consider your firm for award. Okay, let me say that again. Your firm learns about a requirement that it believes it's qualified for, and then your business asks the SBA to send the agency a requirement search letter requesting that the agency consider your company for the award. So essentially you're going to the SBA, you're saying, hey, we're qualified for this. Can you please ask the agency to set it aside for us? The other way that SBA requirement search letters work is the SBA becomes aware of an eligible procurement and contacts your company to discuss possible interest. If there is interest, the SBA will send out a requirement search letter to the agency on the firm's behalf. So you're working to find these opportunities. The SBA is working to find these opportunities. both of them end up in the SBA sending a letter to the agency saying, hey, please set this aside, and here's a company that can do it. So those are your SBA requirement search letter. They're fairly common, but not nearly as common as marketing yourself to the agency. But the less common method of obtaining an 8A sole source award occurs when an agency unilaterally offers a requirement to the SBA without a specific firm in mind. So the agency wants to set it aside. They wanted to set it aside for a sole source award, and they don't have a particular firm in mind. So what will happen then is they'll contact the SBA district office. The SBA district office is going to review its portfolio of 8A firms and reach out to those who have the capability and experience to perform the specific requirement. So both of those sound like pretty good methods, but the key again to doing this is you want to be out there marketing yourself to the agency so that they know if they want to set something aside that they do have the specific firm in mind, and you want to be also out there marketing yourself to the SBA. So let's talk about that. Next slide, please. So in some cases, companies will have to do very little in order to get an 8A sole source contract. In most cases, however, business concerns realize that they need to obtain certain past performance, form solid relationships with the appropriate people, and most importantly, they have to self-market to the agencies that they're interested in doing business with. And agency or small businesses get very frustrated because they get into the 8A program, and after 4 or 5, 6 years, they haven't received a sole source award, and a lot of folks will drop out of the program. So if a business's self-marketing efforts are successful and the agency decides that it would like to proceed with a sole source award to your company, the agency will typically send an offer letter to the SBA which contains very specific information. Upon receipt and review of an offer letter, the SBA will determine whether the firm is eligible, and they'll forward that determination to the agency. If the business is found to be eligible and there are otherwise no issues, the SBA will send an acceptance letter to the agency, and then it's up to the agency and the firm to negotiate the contract. So when you're marketing yourself to the agency, you're much more in control of the process with regards to getting the agency to ask for to send the offer letter, and then the SBA being able to certify that you're eligible. Next slide, please. All right, so what do you need to know before you market yourself to the agency? Market research is key. You have to have a firm understanding of the agency's needs, and you have to understand how the agency procures its requirements. You have to know who the correct points of contact are, and most folks in the industries that you guys are working in do know that. But the real key is that you must be able to articulate how the company can meet the agency's needs and assist the agency in meeting its mission. So we have to understand the needs, we have to know how they advertise, we have to know the right people, but most importantly, we have to articulate how we can meet their needs and assist them in meeting their mission. Next slide, please. As I noted earlier, the United States government has long supported small business concerns by implementing policies to ensure that a fair proportion of their contracts are placed with small business contractors. It's important that small businesses understand how to take advantage of those opportunities, particularly with regards to the 8A program, because not only are you eligible for competitive small business contracts within the program, but if you're able to market yourself to an agency, you're going to be eligible for sole source awards from the SBA. So again, I know we're out of time. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have about how to win SBA 8A sole source awards, or any questions with regards to eligibility. I promise I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Mallory.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing your knowledge and insight today. Today's presentation has been recorded and can be found on our website or YouTube channel within about 48 hours. If you have questions about today's topic, please contact Tim at the phone number or email shown on your screen. Thank you, everybody. This concludes the webinar.